Welcome to Wednesday, What If, by the Storyteller. What if Wednesday Addams was a witch, just like her ancestor, Goody Addams? What if Wednesday was called upon by Goody when her powers started manifesting a year earlier than in the original timeline, and she met Tyler before Miss Thornhill, a.k.a. Laura Gates? Like, comment and subscribe to be updated. Chapter 12. A winter warning. The Addams family estate stood still beneath a heavy winter sky, the pale sun barely cutting through the thick clouds. The mansion loomed dark and imposing, its stone facade nearly swallowed by the gnarled trees that surrounded it. Their bare branches reached out like skeletal hands, clawing at the gray sky, and the snow beneath them crunched softly with every step. Inside, the cold permeated the air, the creaks and groans of the old house accentuating its age. The flickering glow of candlelight cast long shadows down the narrow, winding hallways, where heavy tapestries clung to the walls and cobwebs hung like delicate veils in the corners. Each step Wednesday took echoed softly against the worn wooden floors as she moved through the dimly lit halls, the sound a quiet reminder of the stillness that hung over the mansion in winter. She didn't mind it, this solitude. It was comfortable, in its own way. The silence was something she could control. It was more predictable than the rest of the world, more predictable than the emotions that sometimes stirred inside her. She passed by the portraits of long-dead ancestors, their eyes following her with knowing gazes, but she didn't flinch. She'd long since grown accustomed to their presence. Wednesday's pace was steady, measured, as she made her way through the mansion's labyrinthine hallways. The cold air prickled at her skin, though she barely noticed it beneath her black dress. She walked with purpose, but her mind was elsewhere, working through the latest revelations that had come to her in the silence of the night, visions of Tyler. She had seen it again, the hide, that terrifying glimpse of what he could become. It haunted her thoughts, gnawing at the edges of her resolve. Her footsteps led her to the staircase, the old iron railing cold to the touch as she grasped it to steady herself. She took the stairs two at a time, the creak of the steps filling the air. She passed the old library, the smell of dust and aged paper thick in the air, but didn't linger. There was a restlessness in her, a drive to find her sanctuary. At the top of the stairs, she turned down the hallway, her room just ahead. It was a quiet, almost forgotten place, tucked away in the farthest corner of the mansion, far from the grand parlor and bustling rooms below. The faint sounds of the house seemed muffled here, the walls thick enough to keep out the noises of the outside world. The room felt colder now, the wind howling faintly through the cracks of the old mansion. Wednesday leaned against the desk, staring at her phone with a deep, unblinking focus. She hadn't called Tyler since before the holidays, and the quiet of her room, the weight of her thoughts, made her feel the need to hear his voice again. There was something comforting in it, a steady anchor amidst the storm of her thoughts. She unlocked her phone, scrolled through the contacts, and selected his name. It only took a moment before the familiar face of Tyler appeared on the screen. His smile was warm, as it always was when he saw her, and a part of her, though she would never admit it, felt a small tug of relief. "Hey, I'm glad you called," Tyler said, his voice casual, his smile reaching his eyes even through the screen. "How was your new year?" Wednesday leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing slightly at the memory of the chaos that had unfolded. The memories of her family's explosive antics lingered in her mind like the faint, still smoldering embers of a fire. Dreadful. "There were a lot of explosions," she replied, her tone flat and even. It wasn't a lie. It had been a spectacularly noisy and unsettling affair. Tyler raised an eyebrow, clearly curious. "Was it actual fireworks, or just dynamite?" "Dynamite," she answered, her voice deadpan. Tyler chuckled, a sound that made the corners of her lips twitch, though she quickly masked it. "Sounds like your family's idea of a good time." Wednesday gave a slight shrug, her eyes now scanning the room absently. "I'm used to it by now." There was a moment of comfortable silence, before Tyler leaned forward slightly, clearly curious. "When are you returning to Jericho?" "This weekend," she said, her gaze falling to the worn typewriter on her desk, fingers absently brushing the keys. "Pugsley's also going to be attending Nevermore now." Tyler's smile widened, his eyes bright with amusement. That's great. You two are carrying on your family's tradition. She raised an eyebrow. You sound like my father. Hey, it's an accomplishment, he said with a chuckle. You both can terrorize the halls together. A ghost of a smile passed over Wednesday's lips as she allowed herself a brief moment of amusement. I suppose. Anyway, I'll see you this weekend, Tyler added, the warmth in his voice undeniable. See you soon. Wednesday's response was clipped, but there was something beneath it, something unsaid, that lingered in the silence after her words. Tyler gave her one last smile. Bye. She ended the call, the screen going dark, before she set the phone back down on the desk. The room was still, the cold creeping in at the edges of her thoughts once again. But for a moment, she had allowed herself to breathe, to let go of the quiet weight that had settled on her chest. She turned her gaze back to the cello in the corner and the typewriter, then slowly stood up. Her vision had shaken her, but she wouldn't let it show. She had more pressing things to focus on, like preparing herself for the return to Jericho. But as she moved toward the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing, and not for the better. Something was coming for Tyler, and though she couldn't say it aloud, the unease in her gut wouldn't let her ignore it. The library was quiet, save for the crackling of the fire and the soft clink of porcelain as the teacups met the saucers. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of aged wood, leather-bound books, and a faint hint of rosemary and lavender that lingered from a nearby bouquet. Snow fell softly outside the massive windows, dusting the world in white, but inside, the warmth of the fire seemed to keep the cold at bay. Goody Addams sat in her chair by the fire, her silhouette a striking contrast to the soft glow of the flames. Her presence was commanding, as it always had been. She wore a dark, flowing dress that seemed to be woven from shadows, the intricate lace and velvet details giving her an air of timeless, almost regal elegance. Her long, silvery hair framed her face like a crown, the silver streaks adding years to her appearance, though her piercing, calculating eyes made it clear that her mind had lost none of its sharpness over the centuries. Across from her, Adele sat, the visual contrast between them stark but not out of place. Where Endora's Gothic aesthetic was old-world and steeped in tradition, Adele's was modern yet undeniably Addams. Her black dress, tailored and form-fitting, had hints of red, the bold pop of color offering a refreshing juxtaposition to the deep hues of the room. Her long, straight black hair cascaded down her back, and her porcelain skin gleamed in the firelight. Her lips, painted a striking red, were set in a soft smile, though her eyes held a quiet intensity, as though she could sense the weight of the conversation to come. They both carried themselves with the same grace, the same quiet confidence, an air of aristocracy that couldn't be replicated. Even in the privacy of their own home, they were queens of their realm. I'm sure you know why I called you here, my dear, Endora said, setting her teacup down gently, the fine china barely making a sound. Her tone was smooth, almost unhurried, but there was an edge to it that suggested this conversation would not be light-hearted. Adele raised an eyebrow, her lips curling slightly in a knowing smile. I assume you want me to take charge of Wednesday's education. Endora's eyes narrowed slightly, as though the matter at hand was not as simple as that. Goody can only do so much for our little raven, and she's not exactly the most attentive of individuals in our family. Wednesday's visions of Tyler are now constantly recurring. In addition to that, I've also seen destruction at Nevermore. Adele's eyes flickered with concern, though she kept her voice steady. But we have Goody's help. What could possibly happen, Grandmama? Endora leaned back in her chair, her fingers idly tapping the side of her teacup. If there's a will, there's a way, my child. May I remind you that the Nightshade Library isn't the only secret room at Nevermore? Adele's eyes widened slightly as the implications began to take shape in her mind. You're talking about the witch's lair. We've kept it hidden for 400 years. What makes you think it's going to be revealed now? Endora's gaze was unwavering, her ancient eyes glittering with a mixture of concern and calculation. Just to be sure, I need you to burn all the books in that room. Her hand, delicate but sure, reached for a grimoire that rested on the table between them. She held it up to the candle's flame, allowing the fire to catch on the edges of the pages. The book ignited almost instantly, the crackling sound filling the room as the edges curled and blackened. Endora's face remained impassive as the book burned to ash, turning it into little more than a wisp of smoke. "We can't let anyone get a hold of our knowledge," she added, her voice almost a whisper. Adele stared at the pile of ash for a moment before her eyes flicked to the jar on the table, a mason jar now containing the remnants of the grimoire. The act was methodical, purposeful, and Dora had always been one to take action without hesitation. Adele slowly nodded, her lips thinning into a line of determination. "You want me to burn the books, and reconstruct them with a spell if we need them?" And Dora nodded once, her expression unreadable. Wednesday has to learn how to harness her gifts, not just her foresight. The vision of Tyler, becoming the Hyde. It's troubling, Adele. We cannot afford for it to spiral out of control. You know how these things go. The sooner she can control it, the better. Adele sat back, thinking for a moment, the soft glow of the fire casting shadows on her face. "You want me to apply for a teaching position at Nevermore?" And Dora's lips twitched slightly, though her gaze remained as cold as ever. "You're both a therapist and a lawyer. I'm sure you'll be able to find a position there." Adele tilted her head, considering it. "I could apply as a guidance counselor and assistant coach for fencing, but it's not like I can just leave my job in Washington without a valid reason, Grandmama." And Dora's gaze sharpened, her voice dropping to a level that suggested no room for argument. "Then give one. This is for the survival of all outcast kind, Adele Addams. Don't fail us." Adele met her gaze, and for a moment, there was no hint of hesitation in her eyes. "I understand, Grandmama." She took a slow sip from her coffee, her mind already working through the logistics of what would come next. There was a certain weight to this decision, one that felt heavier than just a simple change of location. It would mean stepping into a role that carried responsibility far greater than she had anticipated. And Dora's lips curled into a faint smile, as though satisfied with her grandniece's resolve. "Good. I trust you'll handle it with the proper gravitas." Adele nodded again, her mind already shifting gears, her expression unreadable. She glanced at the flames dancing in the hearth, the light flickering and casting strange shadows across the room. The feeling of inevitability was thick in the air, and she couldn't shake the sensation that whatever was coming, they would need to be ready. "I'll make the arrangements," Adele said, her voice quiet but firm. The fire crackled louder, and for a moment, it seemed as if the room itself was holding its breath. The brisk wind whipped through the snow-covered grounds of Nevermore Academy as Wednesday and her younger brother Pugsley arrived back for the spring semester. The once solemn Gothic architecture of the school seemed to tower over them, the sharp edges of the spires piercing the overcast sky like an ever-watchful eye. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they moved toward the entrance. Pugsley, clearly excited to begin his first semester, was practically bouncing on his heels. "I can't believe I'm finally here." He grinned widely, looking around at the foreboding beauty of the school. Wednesday, on the other hand, walked with her usual air of cool detachment. Her mind was far from Pugsley's enthusiasm. She was already thinking about the upcoming semester, what classes she would take, what mysterious events would unfold, and, most ominously, the new developments that had been thrust upon her. As they reached the main doors, Eden, who had apparently been waiting for them, appeared out of nowhere. She was practically vibrating with excitement, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Wednesday. Pugsley," she said, nearly leaping toward them. "I have some news." Pugsley, clearly unaware of what was coming, grinned. "What's the news? New creatures? New clubs? Please tell me it's something fun." Eden paused for dramatic effect, her grin widening. "You're going to love this. We have a new guidance counselor, a new fencing coach, and a new normie teacher." Pugsley's excitement shifted into curiosity. "A new fencing coach," he echoed, rubbing his hands together. "Is it someone cool?" But before Eden could respond, Wednesday's stomach dropped. "New guidance counselor?" And fencing coach, she repeated, her voice turning flat. Her sharp eyes narrowed as she fixed Eden with a knowing look. Who? Eden's smile became even wider. Guess what, Wednesday? Your cousin, Adele Addams, is the new guidance counselor and fencing coach. Isn't that amazing? You know, the one from Washington? Wednesday froze, blinking twice as if she couldn't comprehend what she was hearing. Her mind went immediately blank, then flooded with 1,000 thoughts and emotions she hadn't been prepared for. Adele. Cousin Adele. The same cousin who had last been seen at Wednesday's quinceañera just a few months ago, trying to help with her wardrobe, insisting on endless shopping trips, and offering far too much advice that Wednesday never wanted. She looked at Pugsley, who was already beaming, clearly pleased with the news. Cousin Adele? As in, that Adele, she muttered to herself, her voice colder than ever. Oh, yes, Eden said brightly, oblivious to the storm brewing within Wednesday. She's really something. And you'll get to have her around all semester long, watching your back, helping you with fencing, and giving you guidance. She's incredible, Wednesday. Just wait until you meet her in person. Wednesday tried to steady her breathing, but the thought of her cousin, so deeply ingrained in the Addams family yet somehow so utterly different, unnerved her. She knew Adele was skilled, she had been to several fencing tournaments in the past and had taken a few lessons with her cousin, but she never imagined Adele would come to Nevermore, let alone take such an active role in her life here. That's just perfect, Wednesday muttered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She glanced at Pugsley, whose face was already glowing with excitement. And I'm sure you'll be thrilled to have her looking over your shoulder, Pugsley. Pugsley didn't seem to catch the edge in her voice. Totally. I can't wait to learn from her. His enthusiasm was infectious. She's so cool. She's a lawyer, a therapist, a fencing expert, she's basically amazing. She's too amazing, Wednesday said dryly, though she couldn't help but feel the slightest twinge of discomfort. You have no idea what you're getting into, Pugsley. Before Eden could respond, another voice cut through the cold air, this one smooth and unhurried, the distinct sound of high heels clicking against the marble floor of the entrance hall. The voice was familiar, too familiar. Well, Adele said as she stepped into view, her sleek black coat trailing behind her, the perfect embodiment of Gothic sophistication. Her dark eyes locked onto Wednesday's, and a smile stretched across her face that was equal parts affectionate and calculating. If it isn't my favorite Addams. Wednesday's heart skipped a beat. Cousin Adele, standing right there in front of her, looking as composed and stylish as ever. Wednesday felt an uncomfortable jolt in her stomach. Adele stepped forward, casting a glance at Pugsley. And here's Pugsley. Welcome to Nevermore. I'm sure you'll fit right in. She gave him a small, knowing smile. Pugsley's face lit up. You're going to teach me fencing? That's so cool. I can't wait to learn from you. Of course, Pugsley. I'll make sure you're the best, Adele replied, her voice smooth and measured. And then her gaze shifted back to Wednesday, her smile widening. As for you, Wednesday, Adele said with a knowing tone, I'm looking forward to spending more time with you this semester. Fencing lessons, guidance sessions, and everything in between. You'll be well taken care of, I promise. Wednesday's stomach churned. She had been hoping to spend this semester without any unnecessary interference. But now, with Adele hovering over her like an uninvited shadow, it seemed there was no escape. The thought of Adele, always so perceptive and controlling, closely monitoring her every move, especially around Tyler, made Wednesday's blood run cold. I'm sure you will, Wednesday said through gritted teeth, her tone betraying none of the discomfort she felt. She shot Pugsley a look that he didn't quite catch. The semester just got a whole lot more interesting. Eden, sensing the tension but unaware of its depth, smiled brightly. See? Isn't this exciting? It's going to be so great for you both. You're going to love it. But as Adele took a few more steps toward them, her presence loomed large in the cold winter air, and Wednesday couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to be under the watchful eye of someone who would scrutinize every moment of her existence at Nevermore. As the door to the academy slowly closed behind them, locking the three of them inside, Wednesday knew that this semester would be far from ordinary. And in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but wonder if she was about to be caught in a web from which there would be no escape. As Wednesday and Pugsley followed Adele into the entrance hall, their footsteps echoing against the cold marble floors, the atmosphere seemed to shift. The large chandelier above them cast shadows on the walls, and the chilly air of winter felt a little colder with each passing moment. Adele, ever composed, looked over at Wednesday and Pugsley before turning toward the far side of the hall, where the large wooden doors led into the principal's office. But before she could continue, a familiar voice rang out from behind them. "Ah, Adele. There you are." The voice was unmistakable, smooth, theatrical, and full of warmth. Morticia Addams, Wednesday's mother, appeared at the top of the staircase, her dark eyes glinting with that unearthly glow Wednesday knew all too well. Gomez Addams, her father, was right behind her, his ever-energetic presence bouncing down the stairs as though he hadn't a care in the world. His wide grin was impossible to miss, and his arms were stretched out for a dramatic embrace. "Aunt Morticia, Uncle Gomez," Adele said warmly, stepping toward them with that trademark elegance. She bent slightly, offering both of them a kiss on each cheek, as was customary in their family. Wednesday watched the interaction, an odd feeling gnawing in her stomach. She had never quite understood the way her parents interacted with Adele. It was as if they were all playing a part in an old, secret performance. The way they exchanged smiles, the perfect blend of affection and theatrics. It was all a bit much, even for an Addams. "Ah, my dear Adele," Morticia said, stepping forward, her eyes glistening with a deep, maternal affection. "How wonderful to see you again. The children are no doubt excited to have you here." Adele gave a soft smile. "Thank you, Aunt Morticia. It's good to be back among family." She turned slightly toward Gomez, who was now beaming with that typically exaggerated joy. "And it seems I've come just in time for Pugsley's first semester here. I'm sure he'll be exceptional." Pugsley, grinning from ear to ear, nodded eagerly. "I'm gonna be the best, Aunt Adele. You'll see." Gomez placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his eyes twinkling with pride. "I have no doubt, my boy. The Addams spirit is strong in you." Adele chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling just as much. "Indeed. Let's hope the same spirit works its magic on the fencing team." Gomez clapped his hands together. "Fencing? Now, that's a sport I can appreciate. I think I may have to come watch a match or two. It's been far too long since I've seen a good duel." "Maybe we'll get you out there, Gomez," Morticia said, her voice smooth and slightly teasing. "Although, I suspect you might find your skills a little rusty, compared to Adele's." Adele laughed gently, the sound rich and warm. "I'm sure Uncle Gomez would put up quite a fight," she said, her smile briefly softening. "But perhaps we should focus on the younger generation first." Gomez winked. "Ah, yes, of course. The younger generation." He turned to Pugsley and Wednesday, his eyes twinkling with that familiar, mischievous glint. "You'll have your hands full with that one," he said, gesturing toward Wednesday. Wednesday merely raised an eyebrow, unaffected by her father's antics. "I'm sure she'll be fine." Adele smiled at the exchange, then turned to look at Wednesday, her gaze holding a knowing intensity. "And how is my favorite cousin?" she asked, her voice smooth with a hint of something else. "Are you ready to dive into the thrills of this semester?" Wednesday could feel the weight of Adele's words pressing against her like a silent challenge. She knew Adele well enough to understand that her cousin was never truly satisfied with the simple answers or the easy paths. And this semester would undoubtedly be anything but easy. "I'll manage," Wednesday said flatly, not missing the way Adele's lips quirked upward at the corners. Gomez clapped his hands, drawing attention back to him. "So, my dear niece, what brings you here to Nevermore? Surely, Washington can't have been enough to keep you away for long." Adele paused for just a moment before answering, the subtle tension in her voice not lost on Wednesday. "I've been given a temporary assignment. Community service, you could say. A little advice from the family." She shot a quick glance at Wednesday, a knowing look flashing across her face, before returning her attention to Gomez and Morticia. "Community service?" Morticia raised an eyebrow, a shadow of concern flickering across her expression. "What did you do, my dear?" Adele smiled softly, her expression carefully neutral. "Nothing criminal, Aunt Morticia. Just a misstep in Washington. Nothing that would land me in jail, of course." She glanced at Wednesday. "But, sometimes, a little time away from the usual haunts is just what's needed, don't you think?" The room fell into a brief, uncomfortable silence, as if everyone were collectively trying to assess whether they should press further or simply let it go. Gomez, ever the optimist, broke the quiet. "Ah, a little vacation time, then. Well, we're all thrilled to have you, Adele. It's been too long since we've had a chance to spend time together." Adele nodded, her demeanor as composed as ever. "Indeed. It's time to focus on family. And who knows," she added, her smile turning sly, "perhaps a bit of influence on the next generation wouldn't be such a terrible thing." Pugsley, still oblivious to the undercurrents of the conversation, was grinning wide. "Aunt Adele, are we going to do fencing now?" Adele laughed softly, glancing at her cousin. "Not just yet, Pugsley. But soon enough, I promise." Wednesday shot a sideways glance at her cousin. "Great. Just great." The semester had barely begun, and already, it felt like she was being smothered by family. "Well," Morticia said, breaking the moment, "let's make sure you feel welcome here, Adele. I'm sure this place could use someone with your particular skills." Gomez nodded enthusiastically. "And if you ever need anything at all, just say the word." Adele's smile widened. "Thank you, Uncle Gomez, Aunt Morticia. I'll make sure to settle in quickly." And as the exchange continued, Wednesday's mind drifted back to the realization that this semester, like every one before it, would be filled with the unmistakable shadow of her family hovering over her every move, especially her cousin, Adele. Principal Weems stood at the front of the hall, her voice cutting through the room as students settled into their seats. The chatter died down quickly as she gave a subtle but commanding look. "Good morning, students," she began, "as we embark on the spring semester. Yes, it's still winter, but let's not dwell on that. There are a few introductions I'd like to make." She gestured to her right. "First, please welcome Miss Thornhill, our new botany teacher. I'm sure she'll plant the seeds of knowledge in all of you." Miss Thornhill, a woman in her 30s with bright red hair and glasses, stepped forward with a friendly, warm smile. She wore a blue jumpsuit, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, and red mud boots that matched her fiery hair. "Hi, everyone," she said with a soft laugh. "I'm Miss Thornhill. I know what you're all thinking, botany, how exciting, but trust me, it's going to be fun. I can't wait to dig into the subject with all of you, and hopefully keep my plants alive this time," she added with a playful wink, causing a few chuckles among the students. Principal Weems gave her a brief nod before turning to the next introduction. "And now, a more familiar face, though I'm sure she'll enjoy introducing herself. Please welcome, your new guidance counselor and assistant fencing coach, Adele Addams." As Adele stepped forward, her presence immediately commanded attention. Tall, with straight black hair cascading down her back, she exuded an effortlessly cool aura. Her skin was pale, and her lips painted a bold red that made her stand out even more against her goth-inspired, yet modern and sleek black outfit, a perfect balance between edgy and high fashion. The students couldn't help but glance her way, mesmerized by her striking appearance. Adele took the mic with grace, her gaze sweeping over the students with an amused smirk. "Thank you, Principal Weems," she said, her voice smooth and deliberate. "I'm sure you're all wondering what brings me here. Well, let me enlighten you." She paused for a beat, her eyes twinkling with mischief. With that, Principal Weems stepped back, handing the mic fully to Adele, the room now completely captivated by her presence. The students of Nevermore, seated in front of her in rapt attention, were a mix of awe and intrigue. At the front of the room, Wednesday and Pugsley Addams sat side by side, their usual stoic expressions softened by an almost imperceptible glint of amusement. Pugsley's grin was a bit too wide for anyone who knew him well, and Wednesday, while still reserved, seemed almost impressed by Adele's flair for storytelling. The fencing team, ever skeptical of anything new, was leaning forward, the competitive nature of their sport shifting into a curiosity for what would come next. Bianca and Xavier, both formidable in their own rights, shared a glance, exchanging a quiet smile. Even Ajax and Eden were smiling in anticipation, were now completely invested in Adele's words. Yoko, always the one to stand a bit apart, couldn't help but look up from her phone, her attention caught despite herself. It was rare to see such captivating energy at Nevermore, especially coming from someone like Adele. Adele's voice rang out, smooth and commanding as she continued her tale, the rhythm of her words pulling the students further in. She paused, letting the laughter and gasps from the earlier part of the story fade into a more serious tone. I wasn't just any high-flying lawyer in Washington, D.C., she continued, her voice dripping with the kind of wry amusement only someone of her caliber could convey. I wasn't just another overworked bureaucrat doing the rounds. I was a force. A razor-sharp, brilliant woman who knew how to make people listen. I was good, too good, if you want to know the truth. She paced a little, building the tension, enjoying the effect her words were having on the room. And then, of course, I stumbled upon something. Something I probably shouldn't have seen. You know, when you're navigating the murky waters of politics, you start to realize that some things are better left buried. But I'm not the type to walk away from a good scandal. She let that hang in the air for a moment before she smiled again, that sly, knowing grin that made everyone lean in just a little bit more. I was tasked with investigating a veterans' healthcare program, one that was failing, miserably. And what did I find buried under that rubble? Embezzlement. Corruption. A web so tangled that even I couldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe how deep the rot went. Senators, lobbyists, high-ranking officials. People I knew. People who should have been above all this, Adele said, raising an eyebrow as she glanced at the students in the audience. But in D.C., nobody's really above it all. Bianca exchanged a brief glance with Xavier, her sharp mind piecing together the implications of what Adele was describing. Even the ever-cynical Ajax looked vaguely impressed. I had the evidence. I could have taken them down. I could have brought the entire city to its knees. But what did I do instead? Adele leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to make the students feel like they were part of a secret. I made a deal. A quiet one. I handed over the evidence, not to the press, not to the authorities, but to a small group of power brokers, people who knew how to make things go away. In exchange for keeping my name clean, they promised me silence. No one would ever know I'd uncovered their little game. Adele's lips twisted into a rueful smile. But here's the catch, you don't just walk away from something like that. They can't risk you blowing the whistle on them, but they can't send you to prison, either. No, that's where the tricky part comes in. I didn't get fired. Oh, no, that would have been too messy. Instead, they laid me off. She said the words slowly, with a slight flourish, as if she were savoring the irony of it. Laid off for health reasons, they said. Take a break, they said. It's like they thought I was some washed-up intern. They didn't fire me, they didn't ruin my career, no, they just quietly pushed me out of the picture. A temporary leave of absence, indefinitely. Adele paused for a moment, letting the weight of her story settle in. She had the entire room hooked, leaning forward, waiting for the twist. But what do you think happens when an Addams gets laid off? She said, her voice suddenly darkening, taking on a sharp edge. What do you think happens when you try to silence one of us? You think we go quietly? Oh no. Endora Addams, my great-grand-aunt, had other plans. There was a moment of stunned silence before she gave a dramatic pause and turned her gaze toward Wednesday, sitting near the front. And Dora wasn't about to let me disappear into obscurity. Not when she had a task for me. She needed someone to look after her younger cousins. To ensure the Addams family's future was secure. So, she sent me here, Nevermore Academy, where I'm not just your therapist, but your fencing coach, your guide to navigating this strange world of misfits and outcasts. She gave the audience a wry smile, the kind that only an Addams could give, full of mystery, darkness, and a hint of mischief. Not fired, not disgraced, not sent to prison. Just laid off, out of sight, with a little community service to do for the Addams family, Adele continued, savoring the reaction in the room. And now, here I am, with all of you. Guiding you through the next few months, or years, however long this community service lasts. Helping you all to embrace your darker sides, your true selves, and, if you're brave enough, your fencing skills. The students, now completely captivated, exchanged glances of admiration and fascination. Even Principal Weems, who had been stiff and unsmiling at the start, was now watching Adele with a complex expression, half disbelief, half grudging respect. Bianca spoke first, her voice dry but impressed. "You're even more dangerous than you look, aren't you?" Adele chuckled, the sound dark and knowing. "I like to think of myself as strategic. I'm just not in the business of playing by anyone else's rules." Her eyes swept the room, making sure every student, every teacher, understood just how serious she was. "You'll all learn that very quickly, I'm sure. The Addams family doesn't retire. We just adjust. And that's, kids, how I became your new guidance counselor and your new assistant fencing coach." As she took a step back, the students of Nevermore burst into applause, some in admiration, others in stunned awe. There was no doubt that Adele Addams had made her mark on them already. And, as they cheered, it was clear that she wasn't just here to guide her younger cousins. No, she was here to stir the pot, to shake up this quiet little world they'd all built, and maybe, just maybe, make them all a little more dangerous, a little more Addams. When the applause died down, Adele gave a short bow and flashed a wicked grin at the crowd. She was exactly where she needed to be, and they were all going to learn a lot from her. Like, comment, and subscribe to be notified for updates on this series.